Today, we will be also talking about career planning. There's so much in IT. What are the different types of roles? And how do we pick and choose our career path? And how does cloud fit in that career path as well? So we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. We'll start with a 5 minute mind relaxation to make sure all the clutter in our mind before we start absorbing new information. The mind is calm and silent, so it's more receptive to be absorb more information and then retain that as well. That's why we are revising a lot of it. So we'll introduce Dr. Raki as well. She had conducted one of the sessions last week. It's just a 5 minute session. We would ask her to please help our mind relax. She's also a member of our IT Wing. She's a PhD, well versed in IT as well. So if Dr. Raki, if you can help us relax our mind, so we can have Prashant start with the first part of the session.
Dr. Mukesh. Good evening, everyone, and greetings of Diwali. We are sharing an image on the screen. Is that visible to everybody?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay. Is it moving or is it stationary? Can anyone share what are they seeing on the screen? Is it a still image? Or are the circles rotating? How about now? Any motion? Anything moving on the screen? Everything stable? Anyone can see motion?
If I try to focus on it, I can see an optical illusion as if something is moving. Are we supposed to focus on it and just stare at the image?
Just at your first look at the image, are we seeing it moving or are we seeing a still image? Most of us are seeing stationary, some of us are seeing moving image. Okay, how about now? Any motion now? So what exactly is happening at this moment if you try to understand? This is a mind stress test image. Japanese had started using this, and it was a way to be able to gauge how stressed the mind is. And mind stress is basically caused by the quantity and quality of thoughts. So this technique will help us, the one that we'll practice in the next few minutes will help us regulate the quantity of thoughts and improvise the quality of our thoughts. And like one of the audience, I believe Mukesh said that when we focus, we are seeing motion. And some people, when they focus on the image, they see stillness. Can we start just focusing on one little bead in the image, a blue bead? Just focus on one bead. The moment we start focusing only on one bead, our attention is taken off of the entire image. The focus just goes on one, not numerous. And this helps our mind relax. So the key to relaxation and stress-free living is the power of concentration. Focus. But focus on what? We can't have images throughout in our life in front of our eyes. We have situations, we have challenges in IT, we have challenges at home, we have challenges in relations. We have financial, professional challenges. All we can do is just hold on to one thought, focus on one thought. I am peaceful. Let's just take this one thought. I am peaceful. Everything is all right. Focus. I am peaceful. I am in peace. Silence of the mind. There could be a lot of thoughts rushing, trying to grab our attention. It's okay. Observe. Observe the thoughts come and go. Let's not feed it our attention power. I am in peace. Silence.
वीडियो
Let
सर्विसिंग
me go to this area of silence. Again, my mind will wander, and that is okay. Let me bring it back to this image. Just focus on one beat. And as I get my mind to focus, I can take my attention off of the image and just take my mind into a peaceful realm. I am in peace, in deep silence. I have created this inner space of peace within me. I have the power to disconnect from external turbulences and disturbances and go within myself into this inner space of peace. It's an empty space for me. Nothing enters the space. It's my protected space. Let the disturbances come. Let all the sound disturbances, thought disturbances come. But I am in my inner space of peace. Thank you very much. Let's start off the session with this relaxed state of mind.
Raji. Uh, so we can get started with our first half of the session, where we will be doing a quick recap. Uh, Prashant, if you can please share with us again all your knowledge and help us refresh what you learned in the first two sessions, adding a little bit more onto it, building onto it. Before we do that, are there any in this session who are attending it for the first time? If you can please type yes on the chat, that'll be grateful, so we can adapt our presentation to include you as well and make sure you don't feel lost. Thanks, Bhumika. Welcome to the team. Hello, Rajesh. Okay, I think we've got a few who are first-time joiners, so welcome. We find this session will be productive. Please feel to post your questions in the chat as well. We are monitoring the chat so we can respond to it. We want to make sure this session is as interactive as possible. So if you don't want to wait till the end to ask your questions, you can post it on the chat. We'll respond it. But in the end, you'll be able to unmute yourself and ask questions as well. With that, we'll get started. Over to you, Prasad. Thank you.
Thanks, Mukesh. So, hi everyone, and greetings of Diwali to all of you. I hope all of you are doing good. So, so to start with today's session, we have this agenda of doing revision of what we covered in last two sessions, right? We had a fundamental sessions initially, and then we had a session on a little advanced topics like load balancer and auto scaling and what is high available website and all that. So just to ensure that we are also covering, we are also revising those concepts well so that you are also able to get a good hold of those concepts, and then we are moving ahead. And although we also have a new joiners, so they will also be able to get hold of those concepts as well. So with that, I think we will start the session. So the agenda for today will remain almost the same as we are going to do revision today, and then we will also look like we'll perform the labs around those same sessions as well, so that we are also able to showcase you the practical aspects of those concepts. And we are definitely going to take up your questions and answers today, and that is going to be an interactive session between you and us. So would really appreciate if you could join us on cam and come face to face and do some interaction and ask your questions. So we are going to revise all of these fundamentals and these concepts that we covered up in our last sessions, like what is an AMI and what is a virtual machine, and then what is an highly available website on cloud, and then why do we need load balancing, and what is auto scaling basically, right? So yeah, so just want to check with you, if you could all uh, put on chat, like if you how if based upon the last two sessions, understanding and like familiarity, how well do you consider yourself? Like, are you feeling good with the pace, or how do you think it's the flow is going good? You can give a score out of 10, and would request you all, how are you able to grasp all that we are trying to explain, we try to explain in the last two sessions, and then are you able to catch up with all that? And based upon that, I would request all of you to give a score if you could do that in the chat box, so that will give us good understanding how we are progressing and where we could improve ourselves. Yeah, definitely. And your negative feedback is definitely going to help us improve. And so do not hesitate if it is even not a good score. So, but that would be highly recommended. Okay. So, okay. Anyone else? Okay, no worries. I think we are getting a good score so far. So no worries. Let us progress ahead on our today's agenda. So let's look at the first concept, which is high availability and redundancy on AWS cloud. Okay, so we talked about high availability in our previous sessions as well. So what is high availability? High availability is something, for example, let's consider an example where you want to deploy your website, your own personal website, and you want to make sure that your website does not go down or has to face issues, has to face downtime under any circumstance. So it should be available more than 99% of the time. So such a website which is available generally 99% of the time is generally considered to be highly available on cloud. But how do we make a highly available website on in today's IT environment? Like if you will purchase your own physical server, you will deploy your operating system and then you will deploy your web server. That will not be a highly available website. You know why? Because once that hardware, that physical server goes down and that physical server is getting impacted, then basically your entire website is going to come down, right? But if same is the case on cloud, that you are deploying your website on one region, which is one availability zone, and then you are deploying the same website on another availability zone, which is in the same region, and then you are kind of establishing some kind of load balancing or all that over and above that, then even if this zone, for example, let's consider Mumbai as a zone, and then consider that Borivali is one of the availability zone, and then Bandra is another availability zone, and then Juhu is the third availability zone in Mumbai region, right? So if Bandra is facing some kind of issues, like you can say floods or anything, then at least our two availability zones are still safe, which is Juhu and other availability zone. So still in that case, my website will continue to function. And as you can see that the architecture is connected with a low latency fiber cable, which connects all the availability zones together, which means that as soon as my website gets impacted in this impacted region, it will continue to be hosted by the other availability zone. So we can definitely configure all that in the background. But what I mean to explain you here is this flow, that we have geography, we can consider India as a geography, then we have a entity which is region, then we have India in Mumbai as an India region, wherein we have an AWS availability zone, where we have three availability zones if we consider Mumbai region, and each availability zone has multiple data centers within. So minimum is 2 and maximum is 5. So you see in this region it is showing 2 and then here it is showing 3. So basically we can have every availability zone can have 2 to 5 data centers within each availability zone, which are connected with a very low latency cable, which means the communication between them is very fast. It's very fast. So this is how we deploy high available website. And then what is redundancy? Redundancy is that you have some data stored in this particular availability zone, and due to floods, this availability zone is lacking on power supply. Then power supply, due to power supply, your data is no more accessible. Then it will not be highly available data, right? So what happens in the background is that AWS, to keep your data available all the time, it will it will create a copy of that particular data to the other availability zones that are still there in the region through this high speed fiber, and your data will be transferred to other availability zones within like within a span of few minutes, and then you can still you'll be able to still access your data from other availability zones in that case. So when you are coming from data centers to cloud, you get this benefit of deploying highly available and highly redundant architectures. So this is one of the most important concepts behind cloud. So I hope all of you are you were able to understand. So if you could do a +1 on chat that you were able to grasp this what I try to explain you, just do a +1 and then we can progress ahead on the next topic. Great. Yeah, you can even do a thumbs up. That's reaction will do. Okay. So then let's progress ahead. Yeah, thanks Naman, thanks Deepak, thanks Shruti. Yeah, we'll also look what we are covering on the actual console. So it's not that we are only going through the slides. Later, after this slide section, we will be going on the AWS console, and we will be looking at each and every component that we are discussing right at this moment, right? So don't worry, just flow with the flow, and we'll definitely cover all that. So then let's come to the load balancer. I think I just talked about high availability and talked about how you can deploy a high available website across a region through availability zones and the data centers. Then what is the purpose of load balancer? Like, can anyone okay, no, we'll ask that question later. But what is the purpose of load balancer? The purpose of load balancer is it's very generic. Like if you have some load and you want to distribute it, like for example, if you have a work and if a single person is going to do that work, he will take 24 hours. Now you can distribute that load between two different persons who are of same capacity, and then your work will be completed in 12 hours. So which means you optimized the time, you optimized the resources, you optimized the cost, and you optimized the load as well, right? So here is the purpose of load balancer. For example, in terms of IT language, if I talk about whatever the user traffic you have, that can be called as workload. So here is internet, and we have billions of users on internet. So for example, let's consider that your website is having some user traffic. Let's consider 2000 user requests daily on your website. Okay, then what is the responsibility of load balancer? The responsibility of load balancer is to ensure that the work distribution is distributed evenly across. So as I talked about high availability, you can see that we have an availability zone A here, then we have an availability zone B here. And you can assume that this is basically deploying a website which is currently hosted on 10 servers. So this 10 server is basically hosting our one website, which is highly available if we talk about, because if this availability zone goes for a toss, then even this availability zone is there. And even within this availability zone, out of 8 instances, let's expect that if even 4 instances are going failed, their hardware is getting failed, then even we still have 4 instances, 4 virtual servers that will continue to host our website. So under any circumstance, our website will continue to be accessible to the users on the internet. So that is known as high availability. Now, what is load balancer doing out here? So the load balancer is out doing, so we have 2000 user requests. Let's consider that as 100% traffic. So now if you look at the traffic getting segregated, which means 50% of the traffic is coming here, and then the other remaining 50% is coming here. Then you see the load balancer is further distributing the traffic evenly. 25% of the user traffic is reaching this virtual server, and then 25% of the traffic is reaching here, but which is 50% for this server and 50% for this server. And then the 50% of the traffic that did not go here, that came here, is how it's getting distributed. Now the traffic that has come here is 100% at this level, and that 50% is getting distributed like 6.25, and if we multiply 8 into 6.25, that will be 50%, right? So you can understand from this diagram that 50% of the traffic is being taken up by availability zone A, and the remaining 50% of the traffic is taken up by availability zone B, which means that uh, our two availability zones are equally taking up the responsibility to hosting your website. But if we look internally, then two of the virtual servers are taking up 25% responsibility, and here each and every instance within this availability zone is taking 6.25% of the responsibility of hosting your website. So no, if there is no single entity that is taking that responsibility, then we have the high available architecture. Why? Because if one person goes down, or if one worker's health goes down, then still we have 9 other workers to stay healthy and host our website. Okay. And why do we need a load balancer? Because it helps us avoid single point of failures that you will be able to understand better from the next slide that I'm going to showcase you. Right. So what is SPOF? SPOF is single point of failures. So when you have a huge load, you have millions of user requests, and then still you are dependent on one virtual server, which is even of not a huge capacity. So in those circumstances, your virtual server is going to go for a toss and your load balancing is going to fail. That is why we must avoid single point of failures and use load balancers effectively by placing at least multiple entities in the background to ensure that they are able to take up the load. Okay. So can you do a +1 again on the chat if I was able to help you understand this concept? Great. Thanks, Naman. Thanks, Shruti. Thanks, Deepak. Okay, so I think we are getting a good response. I think everybody was able to understand. Thanks, Gaurav. Thanks, Deepankar, and thanks, everyone. Let's move ahead. Yeah. Now let's come and understand what is scaling. Now, from the previous slide, I think all of you could understand that what is single point of failure and what is overloaded means. So this basically represents overload, right? Now, what is scaling? Now you see here that instead of one horse, we have 4 horses that are pulling the cart, and you can understand when Krishna is on the cart, then it seriously needs auto scaling. It needs scaling, right? Because because the nature of Krishna is dynamic, and anything can happen with this kind of, yeah. So okay, there is a request like to also speak in Hindi. So I will try to speak both of the language in that case. I hope that should be fine with the audience. So anybody out of the audience is not comfortable purely in English, you can raise your hand or you can mention in the chat box. I will try to switch between English and Hindi to ensure that all of you are able to understand. Okay. Anybody who is not comfortable with purely English wants me to also speak in Hindi apart from Hitesh? Okay, no worries. No worries. I will try to speak in English in that case so that everybody is able to understand even though. So what is scaling? Like scaling means that for example we हमारे पास एक resource था that was doing our task and that was getting overburdened. So वो overload हो रहा था. हमको चाहिए कि हम अपनी वर्क के हिसाब से अपने आप को एडजस्ट करें, राइट? कि हमारे पास अगर एक कुछ काम आ रहा है एंड आई एम एबल टू डू दैट, देन इट इज गुड. बट इफ द कैपेसिटी ऑफ दैट वर्क इज गेटिंग इंक्रीज, वो वर्क बढ़ रहा है, तो आई ऑल्सो नीड टू इंक्रीज द कैपेसिटी ऑफ माई वर्कर्स. आई एम गुड, आई एम हेल्दी, आई कैन डू इट, but then in that case I need other resources as well along with me. So what you understand from the image is that एक horse was not sufficient. एक horse is not sufficient. In that case we need 4 different horses to pull the cart of Krishna, the Arjun and Krishna, because it is shown that Krishna has a huge weight. He can he can do a dynamic, he can like illustrate dynamic behaviors on the battleground. So you can assume and understand from that in the last image, if you see that this is getting overloaded, right? So ensure that one of the horses is not getting overloaded. We need हमको 4 horses चाहिए so that we are able to keep up the workload evenly distributed, and we are able to scale out. Scale out means हम अपने resources को बढ़ा रहे हैं जैसे हमारा input बढ़ रहा है, right? So I will go to the next slide and will try to explain auto scaling. What is the purpose of auto scaling? So the purpose of auto scaling is कि हमारे पास जो यूजर ट्रैफिक आने वाला है उसका हमारे पास कोई कैलकुलेशन नहीं है. हमारे पास कोई उस चीज का प्रिडिक्शन नहीं है कि कितना यूजर ट्रैफिक आएगा. वो 2000 रिक्वेस्ट भी आ सकती हैं, वो 10,000 रिक्वेस्ट भी आ सकती हैं. सो our user, our input, our workload, our user traffic can could be very small and could even go to a very huge extent. It could be even 1000 user requests, and it can even go beyond 10,000 user requests. So how do we manage such kind of traffic? when today I am getting 50 requests and tomorrow I'm getting 1000 and day after tomorrow I'm getting 10,000. So you need some kind of automation in the background to ensure that you are also is able to scale out and scale in. Scale out and scale in means that हम अपनी कैपेसिटी को बढ़ा रहे हैं जैसे इनपुट बढ़ रहा है और अपनी कैपेसिटी को रिड्यूस कर रहे हैं जैसे ही ट्रैफिक कम हो रहा है. तो दैट मीन्स ऑटो स्केलिंग. I hope I was able to explain that. So whenever the workload is dynamic, हमारा input जो है user traffic जो है dynamic है, कोई static नहीं है कि आज कितना आ रहा है, कल कितना आएगा, परसों कितना आएगा. तो उस केस में हमको ऑटो स्केलिंग चाहिए. अब इसका एक एग्जांपल आपको समझाता हूँ कि अमेजोन की सेल होती है दिवाली पर, ठीक है, बिग बिलियन डे सेल. बट नॉर्मल डे पर अमेजोन के शायद 1 लाख प्रोडक्ट्स बिकते होंगे, लेकिन दिवाली पर शायद 10 लाख प्रोडक्ट्स बिकते होंगे. तो जहाँ पर 1 लाख प्रोडक्ट्स बिकते हैं वहाँ पर ट्रैफिक को हम 1 लाख मान लेते हैं, 1 लाख यूज़र रिक्वेस्ट. और जहाँ पर 10 लाख बिकते हैं वहाँ पर 10 लाख यूज़र रिक्वेस्ट मान लेते हैं, ठीक है. और फिर जब सेल खत्म हो जाती है तो वो वापस 1 या 2 लाख पर आ जाते हैं, ठीक है. सॉरी. सो विच मीन्स दैट द ट्रैफिक इज डायनामिक. तो आज मुझे 100 सर्वर्स की जरूरत है अपनी वेबसाइट को चलाने के लिए, लेकिन कल जब सेल आएगी तो I will need 1,000 servers to run in the background, but that should be automatically scalable, right? But as soon as my sale gets over, it should be automatic that I'm scaling back to 100 back. Okay, so that is auto scaling, and this is why we need auto scaling for environments where we cannot predict the traffic and the workload. Yeah, so moving ahead. So any questions so far, any on any of the particular slide anybody would want to ask? And then we will explore all of these components on the AWS console to give you a better understanding around that. And if you have any particular suggestion that you would want to explore any particular item, then we can also do that. So any questions so far, you can raise your hand, you can type that in the chat box. If you have a question, you can do a yes, and then you can type your question. So today we are going to focus more on question and answer session because, as you know, we are revising the things, and we are not doing a kind of we are not going on the new topics. So it would be better if you'll ask questions around these things that we discussed in our last 2 sessions. Any questions with respect to any cloud or any concept that we covered in the previous topic, that will be ultimately beneficial for all and should be good. So I see there is no question. So can we go to the console section then? You can do a +1 if I should go to the console and help you explore all of these things there. Okay. Okay, Naman, sure. We'll take that query. Okay, so to explain you what is a virtual machine, I will have to tell you a kind of story, which means if we go back 20 years back down the line, अगर हम 20 साल पीछे जाते हैं in the IT world, there was a thing like people used to purchase physical servers. Just a minute. Okay, so now I think people are starting to put on their questions. So I will request all of you to put your questions in the chat box, and I will go serially covering from the top to bottom. So meanwhile, I will answer Naman's question, which is to talk on virtual machine, and then I will gradually come down to cover other questions as well. So what is a virtual machine? So virtual machine concept, like I was talking that 20 साल पहले, like we used to purchase physical servers. Like any IT company that is in the market, उसको एक physical server का order create करना पड़ता था, and then HP और Dell जो भी companies थी, they would deliver that physical server to that company's location. फिर उसके बाद वो company that will keep that particular server in their data center, and in after putting that in the data center, they will do installation of their operating system and then install application, and that server will only be able to run only one application, not more than that. And under like it will be able to host one operating system or at most two, not more than that. So that was the limitation at that point of time. But gradually, around 10 years back, there came a technology which is known as virtualization. Okay, and which was the company that came with virtualization was known as VMware, which is, you can even Google that name, which is VMware. So VMware came with the technology which is known as virtualization. And what is virtualization? Virtualization is basically nothing. It means that you purchase a very big physical server, and then what you can do through the help of VMware technology, just install the VMware technology on that particular server, and you can create numerous servers out of that one physical server. ओके, फॉर एग्जाम्पल आपके पास लैपटॉप होता है, ठीक है, आपके पास लैपटॉप में 500 जीबी की हार्ड डिस्क लगी हुई आती है, बट आपकी मर्जी होती है कि आप उस 500 जीबी को अलग अलग लोकल सी, लोकल डी, लोकल ई और लोकल एफ में भी डिवाइड कर लेते हैं अपने यूज के हिसाब से, राइट। लेकिन वो हार्ड डिस्क अंदर तो एक ही होती है, लेकिन जो आप माई कंप्यूटर में जाके वो देखते हो पार्टीशंस, वो वर्चुअल होते हैं। वो बस एक लॉजिकल सेक्शन को डिवाइड करके उसको आपको लोकल सी दिखा देता है, जहां पर लोकल सी खत्म हो रहा है वहां पर लोकल डी शुरू हो रहा है, तो वो उसको आपको अलग दिखा देता है कि वो लोकल डी है। एंड देन सिमिलरली लोकल ई एंड लोकल एफ। सो वर्चुअलाइजेशन इज जस्ट दैट कॉन्सेप्ट जहां पर आप कंप्यूट को वर्चुअलाइज कर देते हो। आप वर्चुअलाइजेशन टेक्नोलॉजी को यूज करके एक बहुत बड़े सर्वर को, उसमें से आप 100 सर्वर छोटे छोटे बना देते हो जिन पर आप 100 डिफरेंट एप्लीकेशन इंस्टॉल कर सकते हो। अब जहां पर आप एक एप्लीकेशन इंस्टॉल कर रहे थे 20 साल पहले, देयर now you're able to install 100 different applications on that one physical server through the help of virtualization, and you're even able to create 100 different virtual servers, right? So that is virtualization. So we will look at that virtualization on console as well. Now, Naman, does that answer your question? You can do a thumbs up. Okay, so no worries. Then the next question is load balancer a paid service? So load balance, we have different kinds of load balancers on cloud. We have application load balancer, we have network load balancer, gateway load balancer, and the last one is classic load balancer. So if you're using classic load balancer, then classic load balancer is free of cost. You will not have to pay, but the other load balancers might be chargeable, like application load balancer and network load balancers are charged. Then the next question from Deepankar is, what difference it gets to host on normal server and hosting it on the cloud? So I think I already answered that in the virtual machines concept as well, that if you're going to host anything on your normal server, which is your physical server, then that is not highly available, because if that server goes for a toss, वो server पे अगर कुछ hardware failure आता है, then your entire hosting has to suffer, will come down and will be impacted. But if you're hosting on cloud, then we have a concept of availability zones and regions. So आप एक availability zone में एक सर्वर डिप्लॉय करो अपनी वेबसाइट का, दूसरे अवेलेबिलिटी जोन में दूसरा वेबसाइट का सर्वर डिप्लॉय करो, एंड देन इवन इफ the hardware of that particular server fails, it will immediately get transferred to a healthy hardware. और अगर वो पूरा का पूरा availability zone भी fail हो जाता है, then that particular website will continue to be hosted from the other availability zone that is lying in that region, right? So that is the fundamental behind that. And then the other question from Satpal is it easy to move cloud from one Is it easy to move cloud from one CSP, cloud service provider, to another? Uh, so it is definitely not much difficult. It has its own complexities, but there are many customers in the market who are following multi-cloud strategy. They are on one cloud, they are on also other cloud, they are on AWS as well as on Google, also on Microsoft Azure, and sometimes they migrate their workload from AWS to Microsoft. So that is very common. That is not something very uncommon. So that is even feasible. Then we have the other question from Sunita Harishankar. What is the difference between clouds like DigitalOcean and AWS? AWS is more expensive than DigitalOcean. Okay, so let me explain you all of these concepts by all of these questions by turning off my screen, like stop. Yeah, so are you able to see my screen all? Yeah. So to answer your question, Sunita, so if you look at this Gartner report, which was published in 2021, you will see that the top cloud leaders in this screenshot, in this image, the top one is Amazon Web Services, and then the other cloud leaders are Microsoft and Google. And then if you look in the visionaries, there is only one as of now, which is Alibaba Cloud. And then if we go to the other section, which is the bottom section, wherein we have IBM and then Oracle and Tencent Cloud. So we cannot see DigitalOcean as of now in the top market. So it is definitely a cloud service provider, but it is definitely not among the top 10 cloud providers. So it is also providing the cloud services, but in terms of the support and services and quality, as per the Gartner report, I would request you to follow this report. So it would be better to follow Amazon Web Services or Microsoft or Google to basically enhance or upskill yourself. So that would be like my suggestion for you. So I think Mukesh has already answered Deepankar's question. So any more questions from anybody? And then we have one question from, okay. Okay, so any more questions from anybody else? I think Mukesh has already answered some of the questions. Otherwise, we can go to the console and explore the items. Okay, seems everybody has got their questions answered. So let's come to the console. So any specific suggestion from anybody from the audience that they want to explore a particular thing, a particular service? So I would be more than happy to illustrate that as well. You want me to follow the the things that we discussed today, like AMI? Okay, Deepankar. So to answer your question, what is the difference between cloud and web services? So cloud is nothing but web services only. So anything that is provided you on web, on internet, through a browser is basically cloud. For example, you are using Gmail, right? So Gmail is a cloud service, which is a SaaS, software as a service. Like you simply use Gmail. You don't have to worry about whether it is secure or not, whether your mails are getting breached or not. So you don't have to worry about that, right? And now, for example, we are doing this meeting on WebEx. So WebEx is also a software where we can do video meetings. And you even need not to install that app. You can simply go to the browser and connect to the WebEx, right? So anything that you're getting as a service on web, that is basically cloud only. But if you want to go more specific, then in terms of cloud service providers, the concept is that cloud service providers basically give you that functional, that feasibility of using their own data centers and hosting your services on their data centers and letting go of the other management that you might be doing, where you will be purchasing the resources and will be deploying in your own data centers and doing all that stuff. So that is generally not required in cloud. Okay. So since all of you are fine, so I think we can proceed ahead with the today's exploration of console. Like let me recap the EC2 section for you all. So under the EC2 section, like some of you also had queries around what is a virtual server and what. So to clarify, let me give you that, showcase you that when we go to the EC2 dashboard, EC2 is nothing, but it is a service on AWS where we can launch virtual servers. So instance does not mean anything, but it means a virtual server. So when we'll click on launching an instance, so it will ask for a couple of details. So now here it is asking me for Amazon machine image. So Amazon machine image, what is an Amazon machine image? Machine image is nothing, but it is the operating system that is running in that machine. For example, some of you are having Android mobiles, and then some of you might have Apple iPhones. So in Apple, the operating system is iOS, and in Android we have this KitKat and other operating systems, right? Which is generally Android only. So which means that is the machine's image. So what is an Amazon machine image? The servers that you are going to deploy on Amazon will have that particular operating system. So for example, we have various operating system available here, which is Mac OS, Amazon Linux, and Ubuntu. We have SUSE Linux, Red Hat Linux, right? So we have a couple of operating system. So if I will select, I will give my server a name, which is web server 1. I will select my server, which could be any server. For example, let me take this Red Hat server, which is Red Hat 8, and it's showing me the other details as well, which is it is having 64-bit and x86 architecture, and it is virtualized using the HVM technology, which is hypervisor virtualization. Then I am selecting T2 Micro as my hardware. I will select this particular key to log into the server, and then I am giving a 10 GB of storage to my virtual server. And as soon as I click on launch instance, it is going to basically deploy this virtual server for me. So now I have this virtual server deployed on the console. So if I will go inside that virtual server, you will see that I now have a public IP address, and I also have a private IP address along with that DNS name, which is showing me other details as well. So if I will do this refresh, it is now right now showing in pending state, but yeah. So you see that my server is currently is running within a span of 1 minute only. It did not even take more than a minute to deploy this server. And this hardware is a very basic hardware, even though it did not take more than a minute. So this is the advantage of cloud, agility, that you can use cloud services, and you can deploy your applications, you can deploy your servers within a span of few minutes only. But that is not the case if you are following a data center architecture, because in data centers, like you have to follow that flow, bring that physical server, install that virtualization technology over that, and then pull out a virtual server and then do the operating system installation, and then you will going to deploy the application and all that. So that involves a lot of procedures, but here you just got a virtual server as a service, right? Now we can even connect to this virtual server using the public IP address. I am using MobaXterm tool to log into my virtual server. So you can even download the same tool at your end. You just need to go to the session and SSH. Under the remote host, we need to put in the public IP and give the key that we selected, so which was 22. I will do OK. And now it's asking me for a user. So the default user for Red Hat is EC2 user. So what it you can see here, as soon as I gave my username and pressed enter, it shared that authenticating with public key. So the public key that I had got from the console, it authenticated me successfully, it said that you are a valid user and allowed me access to the server. So now I have access to the server. I can become the root user and I can look at the operating system details. For example, I can look what version of this operating system is. So here you can see that this operating system is basically Red Hat Linux. This is 8.6 version, and you can get more details here, which is you can find more documentation with respect to this URL here. If you want to report any bug in this operating system, you can go to this URL and etc etc. And let me showcase you the file system of this architecture. So this is the file system of this particular operating system, wherein we have a couple of folders within this Linux operating system. Lib means libraries, wherein, yeah, and then bin means binaries. Binaries means for example, your Java applications, the binaries of Java application. If they are not there, then your Java program will not execute it. So whatever application that you want to trigger must have binaries here. And then we have proc. Proc means processes. That data of all the processes are stored here. And then we have wherein all the variable data like logs and all those stuff is basically stored in where. Home is the home directory, root is the root users directory. ETC is basically configuration. All the configuration that you do, all the settings that you touch upon in your operating system is basically stored in ETC. And run is basically for runtime. Whatever that is executed live is stored in run. So that is kind of uh, like how you can go ahead and deploy your virtual server on cloud. So with that, I think I complete the 60 minutes of just a minute.
Sham, we can probably take a quick 5 minute break, and then we'll start with
Yeah,
the
sure,
career guidance session.
sure, definitely. Thanks, Mukesh. So now we can take a 5 minute break and then we'll be starting with the other session. And Mukesh will be talking on that. So sure, Mukesh. Uh,
Thank you.
so yeah, let me share my screen. Just allow me a minute. So hi everyone. So I think now we can, I think you all can ask your questions if you have any. Otherwise, Mukesh can start. Mukesh, over to you.
Thanks, Prashant. So, this remaining half of the session, we want to answer some of the basic questions. What are the roles in IT? We find a lot of the audiences, they may not have much of an IT background, or they necessarily don't know what type of career to pursue in IT. Most of the time, we find out that the way people get into IT and in their roles is purely as good as rolling a dice and saying, I'm going to go into testing, or I'm going to become a project manager, or I'm going to do Java development or become a .NET developer. Uh, Usually, because of the lack of knowledge of what the big picture is, we get started with what is offered and we think that is the best. A similar analogy for that is an elephant in the room with no lights on. If you ask someone, they'll say an elephant is someone who has a big tail. And someone will say elephant is someone, which has big ears. Someone will say elephant is something which has a big trunk, but no one has really seen the elephant. And everyone has their own interpretation and perception of what is IT, or what the elephant is. So IT is the elephant in the room. So the purpose of this slide is to show the big picture, the elephant. IT is vast. So the purpose of this slide is to show what are the different roles and how do they fit in this big landscape. So if you look at it, right, there are different types of organizations. The purpose of IT is to help the business. Your organization could be in the business of selling handbags. Your organization could be in the business of selling goods, and to automate those processes to make sure that efficient processes are there. The supply material, the back end, and all that is automated. IT plays a huge role. So typically, you would have an organization where you'll have the users. We start from the top. You have users. You could be a retail organization where your customer is a retail customer. Why that is important? Because if it's a retail customer, we want to make sure they have a profile. Any interaction with them, we are capturing in a tool called customer relationship management. You're maintaining that relationship. And there are a lot of other things we want to make sure the customer is satisfied. Sometimes your customer may not be a retail customer, but it might be another business who's a customer to you. For example, you're a wholesale supplier. You're not selling directly to a retailer, but you're selling to another uh, organization, which is then selling to retail. And you can have various suppliers and so on. And many times we build IT applications which may not be for the end retail customer or for our business to business customer, but it could be for internal use as well to bring in more efficiency. Your users could be compliance regulators as well. So there are various types of users as such, and accordingly keeping those users in mind, their needs, so that we are providing a service to them to make their lives easier, make that interaction a lot easier. IT comes in. And the way to look at it and simplify it is, we look at IT in different layers like a layers of a sandwich, right? You have a bottommost layer, which is the infrastructure. And what we are covering is the public cloud. All this infrastructure is hosted on public cloud. There are multiple public clouds, most popular AWS, Azure, Google Cloud. So we are just covering a tiny piece of the big picture, which is where does all this IT servers and all this functionality hosted? And that's on public cloud at the bottom over here. But what can be hosted on the public cloud? Well, that depends on your IT organization. What does your organization do? So going back to the presentation layer, you'll see there are a lot of different types of softwares. The most common one, especially for beginners who don't have much of experience in IT, and they want to jump into IT, they want to make sure they've got relevant experience. So organizations will say, okay, you had a degree in mechanical engineering, but you want to make a career in IT. You want to make sure you understand what's a client, what's a server, what is reporting, what's a dashboard, what's a data model. So if you have Salesforce administration certification or anything with Salesforce, that kind of proves that you are an IT person because you understand what's a client, what's a server. The whole premise of IT is, we are putting services on the web. So it's essential to understand that client server architecture. Just like, in a restaurant, you have a server serving the dishes to its customers, right? Here, the web server is serving web requests to its customer. In this case, the the browser is a client sending web requests to the server. So similar model as well. What is important is there are multiple technologies used on the front end, which is directly interacting with your end user. The end user doesn't know how many servers you have, what kind of IT you have, how many systems you have. What they see is your application. Anything which is in the presentation layer, they are interacting and using that. So it's very important that whatever you build, that is your customer facing. Your customer could be B2B customer, retail customer, a supplier of yours, or your internal user. No matter who the user is, they are having a good experience using your application. So there are different softwares which help you build those nice looking websites, whether it's a mobile app or you are providing nice forms and so on. What is important is that we are moving away from less and less coding and doing almost little or no coding. 20 years back, when we started our IT career, every time we started a new project, the question was, which programming language do you want to use to start your project in? Primarily, it was Java, and .NET came in 2001. So it was more of a question of, do you want to write your own code and build the application, or do you want to by someone? But most of the time, there wasn't a lot of software as well. There were very few software, Tally and SAP, which is an enterprise resource planning software. So those giants still existed then as well. But most of the time, we would write our own software to do something. That trend has completely changed. Today, if we start an IT project, the first question is not which programming language should we use. Should we use Java or .NET to build it? The first question is, what is existing that we can use to provide the functionality? If you're building a web portal or if you're building a mobile app, right, you don't want to start from scratch. If someone is already offering it, uh, you want to leverage that and customize it and configure it for your needs. And instead of you buying it, now the question is, can you rent it? Can you use its software as a service? So the whole emphasis is now more towards using platform as a service or software as a service capabilities instead of organizations building and writing their own code. And that's a significant shift. And it's important from a career planning perspective because we have a notion that if you want to get into IT, you have to start your career with a programming language. You have to be a programmer with a lot of programming experience to be able to get into IT. That is necessarily not true because there are a lot of roles. For example, if you're a project manager, you don't need to know programming. You you should know what a programming language does. It's good to know what are the different programming languages like Python, C Sharp, Java, Golang, and various others. But you don't have to be an expert coder in any of them to manage a project. If you are a business analyst who's interacting with your users, again, depending on the type of organization, what users, all the business analyst is doing is asking the questions, collecting the requirements, putting it in a tool, or could be something as simple as capturing it in Excel. You again don't need to be a programmer to understand and capture the requirements. Again, it's good if you know what it is, but you don't have to. So most of the time, it's good if you know how to use some of these softwares. Uh, there's a lot of always demand in the market if you know how to use some of these software. And if you see there's a lot of it, all of these are software packages. For example, customer relationship management, where you're capturing the notes. What did the customer say? What complaint they had, or what was the interaction, so they don't have to explain every time they call in and someone else picks up and they have to explain the whole thing again. For example, Samsung, if you're calling them saying my washing machine has broke down, can someone come in and fix it? They'll say yes. No one comes after 2 weeks. You're going to call them. They'll say, when did you call? We have no idea. We don't want that. We want to make sure. We'll say yes. Sorry, I know you called 2 weeks back. We have the notes. So something has to capture all that. An example of that is CRM, customer relationship management. The most common, every organization would use some kind of CRM. The most common CRM tools are Salesforce, and the other one is Microsoft Dynamics 365. There are many others as well. But that's an example. If you're starting your career, you don't have to start learning a programming language and going the traditional route, because that takes a long time. That journey will take you. You have to do development for at least 4 to 6 years. Some people will do development for 12, 15 years as well. And they feel, they're best at it, and they should continue doing that. But we want to make sure you're aware. What is that career progression? Typically, you'll start with a developer, then you become a tech lead, then you become an architect, then you become either a manager or program manager or program director, or you go into more into the IT side, where you become an enterprise architect, a chief architect, and so on. So there are various pieces of software. It's better to know one software and be able to get a job in it, rather than knowing a lot of programming languages. It's always good, not discouraging you from programming. You should at least know one programming language. But depending what career path you are choosing, if you want to become an architect, yes, you want to know development, because an architect will make sure all the questions are answered if a developer asks any question. So depending which route you're pursuing, but development is not the only way to start your career. Let's move on to the other tier, right? So we've got a lot of different softwares, how you're building software, how you're doing your user designs, how you're prototyping it, how your point of sale system works as well. The next is you got all this data in your system. The system is capturing all the data, but usually organizations will have multiple of these software, each software installed on its own servers, and we call it as a system. So you'll have a CRM system, which will have, if you're installing, let's say Siebel, another CRM, you're installing it in your environment, you'll have multiple servers and so on. And organizations will give acronyms to their systems as well. Because there are so many systems, there is a need to consolidate all this data from multiple systems and store it in a central location. So that way you can find the trends in the data, you can do reporting on it, you can do analytics on it, you can build a 360-degree view of your customer to understand your customer better. In order to do that, you need to make sure you're bringing in data from your CRM system, you're bringing data from your point of sale, what transactions happened, how much sale was made in each location. You want to be able to get that view where if business wants to know how much, let's say if you're a retail store, how many toothpaste did I sell in Maharashtra versus how many toothpaste did I sell in whole of India? Which region sold the most number of toothpastes? To answer that simple question, you need to be able to have that historical data. So there's a need to persist that data. And that's where the big data platform and all the data architecture comes in to store in this data layer as such. And in order to do that, you have to bring the data from multiple systems or multiple softwares into this data platform. You could be storing it in a relational database, such as Oracle, MySQL, SQL Server, so on. Or nowadays, you could be storing it in a NoSQL database, such as DynamoDB on AWS. Or you could be using Snowflake or AWS Redshift for that data warehousing. But in order to consolidate and do reporting, advanced analytics on that data, you need to be able to integrate and bring that data. So most of the time now, the trend is to use an event-driven architecture, publish that data, bring that data from multiple platforms into this data layer. In the past, we used to use ETL tools like Talent, IBM Data Stage, most commonly used Informatica Power Center. So if you know just how to use even one of these softwares, if you just know how to use Informatica Power Center, you are an integration engineer. If you're doing development, you're an ETL programmer. If you're an architect, you are an integration architect because you are advising how to bring data from multiple systems in from one system A to a system B. System B could be a database, it could be your data lake, it could be a big data platform on the cloud, could be anything, but you're architecting how to bring data from multiple systems, from external data, and so on onto this layer. Which ETL tool to use, or which enterprise service bus or API gateways. There are various softwares to do that. So there's lots to learn. You need to know what is your interest, where the demand is. There's always demand for integration engineers because organizations are complex. They have a lot of systems, so there is a need for integration as well. Most important, depending on the type of organization, if you're in the retail domain, organizations would always have a software called Enterprise Resource Planning, or ERP, such as SAP. So if you know any of these backend systems, right, then you definitely have a good skill set, which will always be in demand. You could be a business analyst who understands how to use a particular software to capture the requirements. You could be a developer who's configuring that software as well. You could be a tester who knows how to do testing in SAP. If you're using a LIMS, a laboratory information management system, if you're in the pharma domain, you've got a lot of equipment which is doing manufacturing. You want to monitor that equipment and so on. There's software to do that as well. There's manufacturing execution systems as well. So there are too many, a lot of different type of systems. We call them as the backend system. The user does not probably see them, but they're just using that functionality. So if you know any one of them, that is good enough to you to get the job. So you have to know what domain you are in. You need to have that domain knowledge, and you need to know at least one of them to be able to understand how the backend systems work. And all this software is installed somewhere on the infrastructure. Infrastructure includes a lot of things: end user computing, mobile device management, and so on. And then there's security. Security is a problem. You know, ransomware attacks, someone getting hacked, your data being stolen, and then automating the deployment. All of this across different servers and so on. So most common organizations will have something called as a DevOps process, which deploys the code and does a lot of things. So what type of jobs are there? Depending on which layer you're working on. If you're focusing just on security, you can be in the security domain. AWS has a lot of certifications for security. AWS has a lot of platform as a service just focused on security. You can have a firewall which you're configuring to make sure you are preventing a denial of service attack. You're making sure your perimeter is protected. There's lots more to it. Security is becoming more and more in demand as well. DevOps engineer, more in demand as well. So anytime you're doing anything on the cloud, there's two type of work. One is how to use the cloud, where to use the cloud, how to integrate with the cloud, and someone who actually does the thing. A DevOps engineer would actually create an EC2 instance, whereas an architect will say, okay, no, this data is coming from an EC2 instance and so on. So to summarize again, depending on which tier you're working on, there could be different roles. So typically you will start your journey as a developer. An architect would provide the specifications, the design, what it is that you're developing, right? A project manager would be managing all the different roles. You have a developer, you have an architect, you have a tester, you have a DevOps person, various other roles as well. And the project manager is coordinating as well. The career path progression is usually you'll start your development and then you become an architect. In the past, there were not many jobs in architecture, but now a lot of companies in US, UK, they are offshoring it as well. And architects are expensive because you need to have a lot of knowledge, and there are different types of architects. So usually you'll become, if you're programming in Java or .NET, you will become an application architect or a technical architect who's a .NET architect or a Java architect. Then as you progress your career, depending on which layer you're focusing on, you could become an integration architect. You could become a data architect, or you could be specialized in any of these softwares and you could become an SAP architect. You can become a Salesforce CRM architect, right? And then you can again progress further, where you are able to work across multiple tiers in the application and be able to integrate and meet the requirements across different systems. And that's what a solution architect does, who would talk with the security architect, who talks with the data architect, who talks with the backend architect. And there's an infrastructure architect as well, who's an expert in understanding all the components of the infrastructure: private cloud, public cloud, Docker containers, servers, virtualizations. So not one architect needs to know everything. So usually the trend is go for breadth versus depth. You are rewarded if you know a little bit of everything instead of knowing just one thing. Now, you should always be an expert in one thing, but you have to expand your horizon. Instead of being an expert in two things, it's always better to know expert in one thing, and then you know a little bit about presentation, you know a little bit about integration, you know what is change data capture, you know what are APIs, you know what an ETL tool does, you know what is Kafka, you know what is RPA. So there are various technologies. If you know even when to use what technologies, what are the tools available, that breadth is good enough. If you know what is NoSQL databases. So there's a lot of information. If you can collect together to better provide a solution, then you become a solution architect. Graduating further from solution architect, you become an enterprise architect who can create diagrams like these with a big picture, who sees the big picture and knows exactly setting up standards, defining and building patterns as such. So there are various roles. I hope this session gives you an idea of what are the different roles, what are the different layers in IT to be able to architect solutions, graduating from a developer into an architect. If you're a project manager, you also need to understand who is a solution architect, what does a solution architect do, and so on. With that, I hope this session has helped you. We can have more such sessions. We can explain you any of these technologies on this diagram as well. So thank you very much. I request you to please provide your feedback. Your feedback is very helpful for us.
Thanks,
Thank you very
Mukesh.
much.
So, audience, I have mentioned a feedback link on the chat. I would request you to take out 1 minute of your time to please fill up the survey. That will help us improve going forward. So, do go ahead and please submit that feedback for us. And meanwhile, I will share the screen and will showcase you all what are we going to cover in the next section. So I hope you're able to see my screen. So the next session we are going to cover the networking component, the networking parameters on AWS cloud. We'll look upon the various like things like AWS networks and subnets, and then what is a classless internet domain routing. We are going to look at the other options that we have on AWS, which are internet gateways, route table, what is a peering, what is virtual private network. So we are going to cover all of these areas in our next session. And we are also going to do a lab around that area so that you are also able to understand and get a good hold of all of these concepts and again a good understanding around these areas moving ahead. And yeah, I have already attached the feedback link on the chat. So request you all to please submit your valuable feedback. So with that, I think we are good to end this session today. We'll be sending you this deck and the recording of the session shortly on our WhatsApp channel. So you can take up the slide and use the recording going forward from there.
Happy Diwali again to all of you.
Yeah, very much. Thank you everyone for joining today and wish you all a very happy Diwali. Have a good time ahead with your family.